program called Friday Night, Saturday Morning, which I've only seen a little clip of, but must have been about 20. But he's so recognisable as the Hugh Laurie we know, certainly in Britain we know from these comedy shows today. He came on and did a sort of satirical piece, or tart comment as he called it.
Hugh's first taste of primetime TV left him hungry for more exposure. That's when Emma Thompson introduced Hugh to a brilliant young writer named Stephen Fry.
Stephen Fry had written a play called Latin, which Hugh Laurie had been a huge fan of, and Stephen Fry already knew Emma Thompson, so Hugh Laurie asked if she would introduce them, with the hope that they would write together for the Footlights.
They instantly saw some sort of soulmates in each other, although they came from, they came from different places. In one way, Fry was gay and came from a troubled background. Laurie was straight and came from having sort of ticked all the boxes in his education, and yet they just clicked it, hit it off, clicked, and really never looked back.
Hugh Laurie and Stephen Fry became fast friends and began working on a sketch comedy show for the Footlights called The Cellar Tapes. They brought the show to the renowned Edinburgh Fringe Festival in 1981. It was awarded Best Comedy.
It was the very first year of the Perrier Award, which has gone on to become the most important comedy award anyone can win in the United Kingdom. And it's the one and only time the Cambridge Footlights won the Perrier Award. That show got them a lot of attention immediately.
The troupe's send-ups of pretentious intellectuals and relevant social issues were a hit with audiences. The Cellar Tapes went on to London before the ambitious cast embarked on an Australian tour.
Australia is no longer like getting on a prison ship like it used to be, but it ain't exactly walking to the corner store either. So it's quite the trip for two young men to go on together.
They performed in small theaters across Australia. They didn't attract as much attention as they had in Britain, but the tour fine-tuned Laurie's comedic skills and strengthened his friendship with Stephen Fry.
Emma Thompson likes to joke that by the time the group got back from Australia, Hugh and Stephen Fry were married. And that really cemented their relationship as a comedy team.
Laurie returned to Britain, where he graduated from Cambridge University in 1981.
This is the Senate House, which is the very heart of the University of Cambridge, and this is where Hugh Laurie came in 1981 to collect his degree in archaeology and anthropology.
Laurie had little use for his degree and left the university with the plan to pursue a career as an actor. Within a year, Hugh got a major break when the BBC filmed the Cambridge Footlights Revue.
It was the first time since Monty Python a decade earlier that people had seen people in the Footlights performing on the television and thought, yeah, there's some real talent here. These people, Stephen Fry, Hugh Laurie, Emma Thompson, they really did seem like a new generation of comedians coming through.
The biting social satire of the Cambridge Footlights Revue was a breath of fresh air compared to the bland British sitcoms of the 80s. The BBC was impressed and offered Laurie and his Cambridge friends their own primetime sketch show called Al Fresco.
You're looking back at it now, you can see the talents there. It kind of wasn't fully formed. Some bits stand up well, some bits are as good as Monty Python. They have the same kind of satirical comments on modern society as Python did, slightly sort of surreal silliness to it.
Al Fresco became popular among critics and to some extent among fans for a couple of really innovative technical aspects. For one, as the name Al Fresco suggests, it was filmed outdoors, in contrast to on a stage or in a studio. As well, the camera work was different. It allowed the actors a lot more freedom, a lot of sort of faster cuts and faster angles.
Al Fresco ended after 2 seasons. Laurie felt panicked with no work and auditioned for every TV commercial and bit part he could find. Hugh was a little envious when it was his friend Stephen Fry who landed a recurring spot on a new BBC comedy series called Blackadder.
Blackadder was a hugely popular series in Britain. To some extent, for devotees of British television in North America, it's very popular as well. A lot of people in North America know it as the early stomping grounds of Rowan Atkinson.
Blackadder writer Ben Elton had worked with Laurie on the short-lived Al Fresco. He created a small role for Hugh during the show's 2nd season.
He came in for the last episode of the 2nd series as evil Prince Ludwig and almost stole the show, so was a bit of a shoe-in for the 3rd series.
Laurie was quickly cast for the 3rd season of Blackadder. as a new character, the dim-witted Prince George.
With Blackadder, the series changed over the first 2 seasons. Initially, Blackadder was a bumbling idiot, but by the second season, he was becoming the smartest one of the group. By the 3rd season, when Hugh Laurie joined the cast, Blackadder was actually quite a smooth rogue, and they needed a comic foil, a dummy, if you like, the stupid one.
Oh no, what a mad, blundering, incredibly handsome young nincompoop I've been.
I think one of the things Hugh brought to Blackadder is what he brings to everything, really, is this total commitment. He has this combination of a sort of a fizzing quality with also a total seriousness, a total commitment to the role.
Laurie's portrayal of the daft prince was a hit with viewers. He was one of the most popular faces on British television.
There's always a risk when you play a part so well that people identify you with it so well that you end up being typecast. And I think Hugh was kind of aware of this, playing the Prince Regent, that he might spend the next 30 years playing dim-witted toffs. But he took it on as a challenge.
As Laurie's career heated up, he met a strong-minded and fun-loving theater administrator named Joe Green. Hugh fell in love, and the couple became inseparable. But it was a professional pairing that would cement his status as one of Britain's biggest stars. In 1988, at the age of 29, Hugh Laurie was a familiar face on British television as the absent-minded George, Prince of Wales, in the comedy series Blackadder. But in private, Hugh was struggling to come to terms with the death of his mother, Patricia, from motor neuron disease.
You know, it's a tough one when you don't have a close relationship with a parent and the parent dies.
As a child, Laurie felt his mother's disapproval. Their relationship had always been strained.
When Hugh's mother died, he didn't cry. He said he was sad, but, you know, it's that thing of not wanting to appear relieved, but he probably was on some level.
The woman Laurie felt he could never please was gone, but his mother's disciplined nature stuck with him, and Hugh dove into his work. The next year would be a busy one for the actor.
Going back to this Presbyterian streak that he was instilled in him, he has to work. He can't rest on his laurels. He has to keep working and keep striving for excellence.
Laurie married his girlfriend Jo Green on June 16, 1989. Stephen Fry was his best man. Within weeks of the wedding, he returned for the final season of Blackadder. But another show called A Bit of Fry and Laurie was generating even more buzz about Laurie's extraordinary talent.
By the time A Bit of Fry and Laurie came about, both Stephen Fry and Hugh Laurie were really part of the new comedy establishment.
A new wave of British comedians began making their mark in the 1980s, with a comedy style that was more politically minded and pop culture savvy than previous generations. Hugh Laurie and Stephen Fry were at the forefront.
By the time their own series came out, they're very much seen as part of that wave and at figureheads of it. In fact, because they had this lineage that went back from Cambridge, that went back to Python and Beyond the Fringe, Peter Cook and Dudley Moore, I think that gave them a sort of huge status.
And control.
A Bit of Fry and Laurie featured Hugh Laurie and his Footlights writing partner Stephen Fry in a series of comedy skits. The response to the pair's sophisticated wordplay and sharp humor was so positive that the BBC ordered 26 episodes of the half-hour show.
You're mad? Am I going to have to say everything twice?
I think a lot of people considered A Bit of Fry and Laurie one of the best British sketch comedy shows of its time. And that's saying quite a lot, considering the tradition into which it emerged.
Hugh and Stephen's stuff was quite bright. It also broke a lot of the rules, usually with fantastically obtuse and intelligent characters getting more and more wound up with each other.
A Bit of Fry and Laurie was fantastically successful, both in terms of winning awards, getting high ratings. The critics loved it and the public loved it. It's very rare that a show gets great ratings and is loved by the critics, and they achieved both.
During its 5-year run, A Bit of Fry and Laurie also allowed Hugh to showcase his emerging musical talent.
Time, where did you go? That's all I had time for, I'm afraid.
It's one of the neat things about Hugh Laurie is that he's such a polymath. I mean, a jack of all trades, a Renaissance man. Music is one of his many talents, and he plays all kinds of instruments.
His musical talents are manyfold. He plays a piano, saxophone, harmonica, guitar, all of them well.
In 1990, Laurie was asked to star as the piano-playing Bertie Wooster in the TV adaptation of Jeeves and Wooster, based on the books by P.G. Wodehouse. The author was known for his eccentric characters. Laurie loved the books as a kid and claimed they had helped him survive his teenage years.
He writes a very funny essay in 1995 that he described himself as having no manners, no personal grooming, no sophistication, basically being a teenage slob, and then all of a sudden reading his first P.G. Wodehouse book and sort of seeing a bit of the light at the end of the tunnel.
Wodehouse's most popular characters were the hapless Bertie Wooster and his patient valet, Reginald Jeeves.
Hugh, given the background he had and his upbringing, I think he identified with the characters very much in Wodehouse's books and his novels. And also the cleverness with words, the intelligence that was there. I think Hugh Laurie really kind of loved that sort of thing. He really embraced it.
He jokes that, yeah, after the first book I read, I could actually use a fork and knife. And, you know, by the second or third books, I was actually a bit of a civilized human being.
Hugh Laurie, he saw a lot of his own foibles, a lot of his own failures, and a lot of his own successes manifested in these books.
Despite his admiration for P.G. Wodehouse, Laurie was not sure he wanted to play the clueless Bertie Wooster.
When they came to him and Stephen Fry with the idea, well, their first reaction was, well, you know, you can only ruin it. And they said, all right, well, we'll get someone else. So they said, well, let us ruin it.
You almost get the sense that he didn't want to kind of cheapen his appreciation of this fine literary form by trying to put it onto the small screen.
Laurie and Fry finally agreed, and the first episode of Jeeves and Wooster aired on April 22nd, 1990.
It was important in that it moved him away from sketch comedy into, well, I wouldn't call it straight acting, but into extended acting. He'd done bits and bobs before, but this really showed that he could do the comedy and the roles and make them his own.
I think they took something that was much beloved, something I think a lot of people thought couldn't properly be adapted, and turned it into a lovable enterprise that was also genuinely funny. You cared about these people, they developed personalities, and they made you laugh endlessly.
Laurie's work on TV caught the attention of film producers. He signed on to appear in the movie Peter's Friends with his ex-girlfriend Emma Thompson and Kenneth Branagh. In 1995, he was cast opposite Thompson again in Sense and Sensibility.
He played a small character called Mr. Palmer. In the production notes that have been published, Emma Thompson says she couldn't have imagined anyone better in the role of Mr. Palmer. And when you see it, you kind of realize why.
He took on a very different character. There was nothing foppish about him. There was nothing amusing about him. There were some cynical one-liners. But this was a man who was very stoic, very conservative, and in the end, quite, I would say, heartbreakingly tender.
Even though it was a very small role, a lot of critics noted that he just did fantastically well in it. And it did start to open things up for him in North American audiences.
Hugh Laurie was about to take on North America, but his busy career would take a toll on his emotional health and nearly shatter his marriage. Hugh Laurie had starred in two of the most successful British comedy series of the 1990s, A Bit of Fry and Laurie and Jeeves and Wooster. International audiences started to take notice of the tall, striking actor when he co-starred with Hugh Grant and Emma Thompson in 1995's Sense and Sensibility.
It made major strides in Hugh's career in introducing him to a North American audience.
Then Laurie surprised his fans with another talent. Hugh had always loved thrillers and spy stories. He drew upon his experience as a TV writer to pen his own novel. The result was The Gun Seller, published in 1996.
And The Gun Seller is an interesting little parody spoof, but also a really well-written story in that spy genre. And it was received very well in Britain. The reviewers loved it.
Laurie worried his spy novel would not be given a fair chance because he was known as a comedic actor. Hugh asked his publisher if he could write the book under a pseudonym.
He tells this funny story of his publisher saying, "Look, Hugh, it's difficult enough to sell books when no one knows who the author is. We really got to get a famous name on the cover and maybe some people will buy it."
Laurie agreed to put his name on the cover, but he was unsure how readers across the pond would respond to the book's unflattering portrayal of Americans.
He needn't have worried. It was reviewed very, very well by all the major newspapers, and the book did well in the US as well. He's compared a good spy thriller to having the precision of a mathematical equation.
A terrific read. I mean, it really gallops along, and once again, you're just in awe of the fact that he manages to do so many things so well.
The Gunseller was a bestseller in Britain. The book's success was a great relief to Laurie, but he was not interested in giving up acting for the life of an author. Laurie returned to the big screen as one of Cruella de Vil's bungling henchmen in the 1996 remake of 101 Dalmatians. It was another success,